Hey, how's everybody doing? Today I'm going to talk about my 5 favorite heavy metal albums of all time. But just to quickly, as an aside, I'd like to discuss off-label brand beers that you find in your fridge after a holiday. And today I am starting off my afternoon with Kirkland Signature Light Refreshing Lager. Now, I think Kirkland is like a supermarket chain down south. I could be totally wrong. I could be pulling that out of my ass. Um, it's only a 4.2% alcohol by volume beer, but it's not bad, and I could probably drink 1,000 of these before I switch over to these bad boys because I'm not a fan. I like these better than Bud Lights, but still, it's going to take a few of these to get to wanting to have some of these. So let's get right into my favorite metal albums of all time. My 5th favorite heavy metal album of all time is Pantera's The Great Southern Trendkill. It has, to me, the band's best performances in terms of songwriting, vocals, Dimebag's soloing and riffs on this album. Took the band to a new level, in my opinion. Phil's vocals, Phil's lyrics that he penned for this album are some of his most personal, I think. Definitely his most painful and most tortured sounding vocals. From the opening track where he lays down that scream right from the second you push play. He brought Seth Putnam from Anal Cunt in to accompany him on this track. And it was so different from the previous albums. And it was so different from everything else that had come out around that time. I was into bands like Korn. I was into bands like the Deftones. And, of course, I was into bands like Metallica and Megadeth and Testament and Cannibal Corpse and Morbid Angel and At the Gates and, all this underground stuff. And Pantera were my favorite band. And they come out with this piece of music that just, it changed the way I, as a musician, felt about screaming and about writing about things that were a little more off color, a little more controversial. I wasn't, they weren't talking about, love in that happy sense, or they weren't talking about, drug addiction in these, in these metaphoric ways. They were just kind of laying it all out there. It was all they came out of the gray, and they were definitely they were either standing in the black or they were standing in the white. They weren't playing around anymore. There wasn't this tough guy bravado anymore that you felt on Far Beyond Driven. It wasn't. To me, it was their most honest performances to date, and we're never going to see that again because Dimebag's gone, and Phil's continued on, and I love everything that Phil does. I am a Phil Anselmo fanboy, unapologetically. I don't support everything he does. With the racist comments and the white power hand gestures and all that stuff. And I think enough people have addressed that in the metal community that I don't even really need to talk about it anymore. We're talking about my favorite albums here, and it's also my wife's favorite Pantera album, which blows me away because her and I don't see eye to eye on a lot of music. She's more into country and more into psychedelic, like 60s rock, like the Kinks and the Strawberry Alarm Clock and Jefferson Airplane and stuff like that. She digs that stuff, and I do too. But if her and I are hanging out, other than maybe System of a Down or a couple of other hard rock or metal acts, Pantera is probably the only one we agree on, and we agree on it down to what our favorite album by them is, and that's The Great Southern Trendkill. If you're someone who is into heavy music, if you have not really dove headfirst into what Pantera is all about, and you're interested, I would definitely say start with this album. It's definitely the most abrasive, but if you can walk away from this album and say, wow, this band is not what I expected. These guys are, gritty and talented. That then the other albums are you're gonna fall in love with them the way that I did. You know, it'll just be in a different order that you fell in love with them, because I was a fan from the very beginning. But this album definitely solidified them as my favorite band of all time. Not, this album's only number 5 on my list, but if I had to put together a top 5 bands, Pantera would be number 1, and it wouldn't even be close. I love a lot of bands, but there's not a lot of bands that are even in the same building as Pantera. All right, number 4 is Megadeth's Rust in Peace. The album came out in 1990 or maybe early 91. So that puts me like freshman year of high school. I was into the band at that point, and not as much as other bands like Metallica or Anthrax or Exodus. Megadeth always was a little bit grittier than I was into at that point. But when you hear that opening riff on Holy Wars, and then that rolls into Hangar 18, and other tracks like Dawn Patrol, and that main riff of Tornado of Souls, that scale run that he does. I mean, man, that I remember that album being so life-changing to me at that point. That was I got to see Megadeth for the first time on that tour. And, they came out and ripped through that whole album start to finish before they even played anything out of the older stuff. So, that was something that, still to this day, you don't see very often. Bands come out and play a whole new record for their audience. They play the hits. They want, they play the songs that the fans want to hear, but they were like, we're just, this is who we are at this point in our careers, and we're just going to do that. So we're just going to play these songs. And still to this day, I put this album on and I'm immediately transported back to being that age again. And, each time these songs start, it's like hearing them again for the first time. And, not a lot of bands have songs that make you feel that way, let alone entire albums that do that, especially, pushing 30 years later. It's, if you've never heard this album, I don't know if you have any roots in hard music. But I would definitely check that out. Rust in Peace it's one of the best thrash metal albums that anybody's ever written ever. And there's only 3 albums that I would put above it. So let's stop being so serious for a second. Number 3 is another Megadeth album. Now, a lot of people will say that the classic lineup for Megadeth is Dave Mustaine on vocals and guitar, Dave Ellefson on bass, Marty Friedman on lead guitar, and Nick Menza on drums. I will wholeheartedly disagree with that statement. I will say that the classic Megadeth lineup is the original Megadeth lineup of Dave Mustaine, Dave Ellefson, Gar Samuelson, and Chris Poland. Okay? And it took me a long time to realize this, and for a long time, Megadeth's Rust in Peace was my favorite Megadeth album. Peace Sells, But Who's Buying is and should have always been my favorite. It's more aggressive than Rust in Peace is. It is more politically charged than Rust in Peace is. It has better songwriting. It has better solos. It has a grittier vibe to it. It's more punk rock. It's more of everything that I have come to love about heavy metal music in my life. It's not as slickly produced. It's raw. It sounds like a band who was still clawing at trying to find out who they are as a band. This was at a point where it came out in 86, which the next album that I'm going to talk about after this also came out in 1986. But 86 also, besides the next album I'm going to talk about, You also had to compete with Slayer's Reign in Blood. Slayer's Reign in Blood is, highly regarded, and in a lot of circles, it's the greatest thrash metal album of all time. It's probably a lot of people's number one heavy metal album of all time. I disagree. I'm not really a big Slayer fan. I do like them. I've grown to appreciate them more as I've gotten older. But I heard that album back then, and it didn't hold a candle to Peace Sells. It didn't hold a candle to, the New Order or the Legacy from Testament. It wasn't, or Among the Living from Anthrax. Those albums, all classic, all deserve to be on somebody's list. But Peace Sells was just, when you hear that opening bass line on the title track, and you see that video on MTV when you're an 11-year-old kid, and it's a kid with long hair and in a metal t-shirt sitting, 2 inches from a TV, banging his head, watching, footage of wars and brutalities all over the world, and you hear Dave Mustaine going, "Can you put a price on peace?" And then that riff, that little solo, that little fill that he has there, that comes in right after it. You just, wow, this is what I love about aggressive music and about rock and roll, because back then it was all rock and roll. Billy Joel said it's only rock and roll to me, or however that goes. But Peace Sells, like I said, it wasn't always my favorite. Rust in Peace had that title for a long time, but as I've gotten older, I've appreciated that album's just got something a little bit more in its delivery than even the greatness of Rust in Peace even had to offer. Number 2, Master of Puppets, Metallica. I get a little, you guys will notice I have a little bit of it's called PBA. I can't control sometimes when I laugh or when I tear up. But the first time I heard Master of Puppets was, I was in 5th grade, and a kid in my class came up to me, because even back then I was the only kid in school who wore an Ozzy t-shirt or an Aerosmith t-shirt, or my favorite t-shirt back then was a Ramones t-shirt. I loved music from a very young age, and I was that kid even in elementary school and in junior high that had the band names logos drawn on his book covers and all that kind of stuff. And my friend came over to me, and he had a cassette copy of Master of Puppets in his hand, and he said, "My brother bought me this for my birthday, and I don't like it. But I think you will. Will you give me $5 for it?" So I blew my lunch money for the week on buying that cassette, because I was like, yeah, I mean, I looked at the cover, and there's a bunch of crosses and, some dog tags and a helmet and the logo, and it says Master of Puppets. And I look at the back, and the track listing has songs like Master of Puppets, Battery, Disposable Heroes, Damage Inc. I'm like, all right, yeah, this even if I'm not ready for it, I'll still buy it. It looks like it's going to be something heavy, and I was thirsty for that at that age. And I remember putting it on, and it kind of takes it kind of throws you for a loop, because there's this classical acoustic guitar intro to the first song. And I mean, you guys know this album, hopefully. I could describe it to you with my eyes closed. I could hear 2 notes of any song on the album and tell you exactly what it is. I can name that song in 1 note, kind of a deal. But I remember I got through it, and I was like, all right, this is kind of weird. I wasn't used to that, that classical kind of, finger picking, nylon string kind of pretty sounding, and then all of a sudden you get the and the kicks in, and then the opening riff starts, and that you get that, and you're just immediately like, oh my god, what is this? to that point, I had never heard anything like that. I had heard Ozzy, I had heard Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, Venom, Motorhead. I was like, all right, these bands are all great, and I love what they do, but this was just, oh my God. I was blown away with how everything sounded. Then reading the lyrics, I'm like, oh my God, how is this guy singing this fast? And then I found out that he played guitar while he was singing this fast, and I was like, holy shit. I'm 11 years old. I'm like, oh my God, I want a guitar. I want to be in a heavy metal band. I want to be in Metallica. Oh my God. Then Cliff Burton's bass playing. You get to Orion, and you hear that, do 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 do. I'm like, oh my fucking God! Like, every guy in this band is just so amazing to me, and we from that point on, I was addicted to that band. I wore that tape out. I wore out another version that I bought. I wore out, I went out and bought Ride the Lightning. I went out and bought Kill 'Em All, and I wore those out time and time again. And then when CDs came around, when I was finally, my mom could finally afford to buy us a CD player. Well, the first 3 albums I bought on CD were Master of Puppets, Ride the Lightning, and Skid Row's first album. Sorry, it was like 89 by the time I was old enough to afford a CD player. I liked Skid Row. I thought Sebastian Bach was a great singer. So, that was one of my first 3, but the other 2 were Metallica, and I listened to those, without complaint about having new music. I listened to those albums for probably a year. But, Master of Puppets is just, for me, it's Metallica's best album. It's the best heavy metal album of the 80s, easily, not even close. A lot of people will say it's not. They'll put Rain and Blood, or they'll put something else above that. I'm like, no, it's not even a close. It's not a discussion for as far as I'm concerned. I won't debate this with you because you're not going to dissuade me from my opinion that it's the best album of the 80s, the best heavy metal album of the 80s. All right. But there's still one more, and it is, of course, Paranoid by Black Sabbath. It's not their first album. It came out, they banged out the first 2 in like a year. Whereas the first Black Sabbath album is a lot of blues, and the only real metal song on that album is the opening track. Granted, that changed everything. That probably spawned an entire genre of music. With the slow, plodding guitars, the evil lyrics, and the overall tone of that song. Wasn't like any of the other songs on that album, but with Paranoid, you had the political commentary of War Pigs. You had the psychedelic kind of trance state that Planet Caravan puts you in. You had the drug commentary of Hand of Doom. You had the Electric Funeral. You had, my favorite Black Sabbath song of all time, Fairies Wear Boots. That's just a fun jam. It's so, that whole album is just, it's meaningful, it's bluesy, it's heavy. Iron Man, I keep forgetting that song is on that album. It's probably the most iconic Black Sabbath song outside of Paranoid. But, it hasn't aged well for me personally, but, I ain't changing it if it comes on the radio, and I ain't changing it on the CD when it comes on. It's just, I forget about it because it's kind of, I hate to say it, but Iron Man's kind of the throwaway song on that album, but it's the one that people identify with the most. They know that, Beavis and Butthead, you kind of, da-na-na. You know, it's something that you just kind of, you know it. It's a part of your DNA. So you kind of forget that it's there sometimes. It's a giant blind spot on that album for me. But that album's so fun. You know, I know it's got a lot of serious moments on it, but God, that album's just so fucking fun to listen to because you know every little change that's coming, you know every lyric, and you're transported into a place where it doesn't, where things outside of that album don't matter. And that's probably a lot of these albums to me. You know, I get transported to a place where the outside world doesn't matter when these albums are on. You know, it's hard for me to kind of maybe communicate that. You know, it seems a little silly, you know, especially when I tear up, and, you know, I'm going to hopefully overcome that. Maybe as I find that as I get more comfortable doing something, that tends to happen less. Yes, I do tear up when I'm singing on stage sometimes, which is why I've grown my hair long over the last few years to kind of cover that up, because as I've gotten older, it's become something that I really don't have a lot of control over as much. So, but I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. I hope that you will share it, you'll subscribe, leave comments down in the comment section. Tell me what your 5 favorite heavy metal albums are, or your 1 favorite, or if you've got a top 10, or if one of these bands is also in your favorite album list. You know, tell me your favorite and tell me why you think that your pick from one of these bands is better than mine. You know, I like I said, I want to talk to my audience. I want to have a dialogue. I want people to I want to interact with people in a meaningful way. I don't want to just, you know, shit post and leave nasty comments and silly comments. You know, let's really get into it. I can talk about music a lot, you know, with ease, and I like a lot more than heavy metal, but heavy metal is really what I identify with the most. So yeah, like I said, please comment down below. I will put a link from Spotify to each of these albums, so that if you've never listened to them, or if you want to be reminded as to their greatness, and maybe you can see why they've made my list, you know, they'll be down there too. Please follow me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is @ANobleYeti. And yeah, that's it. I'll probably gonna shoot a few more videos this week, and I'll probably, like I said, I'll stagger them out. But hope you had a good holiday, Christmas, Kwanzaa, whatever you celebrate. If you don't celebrate anything, I hope you had a great, you know, long weekend. And, you know, I hope this week leading up to the end of the year doesn't kick your ass too bad. So yeah,